My family left my fiancé stranded in the woods without his inhaler as a manhood test. He walked 5 hours alone to find help. Now my father says he's the victim, and I'll regret this forever. I'm 28 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and I still can't believe I had to choose between my family and the man I love. But here we are. The thing is, my family has always been, how do I put it, intense. They've always had this weird tradition of testing the boyfriends of the women in the family, to make sure they were man enough or whatever. When I was a teenager, I'd watch them put my cousin's boyfriends through uncomfortable situations, and everyone would laugh about it afterwards. And I thought it was weird, but harmless, I guess. I never imagined they'd go as far as they did with Thomas. I met Thomas like 3 years ago at a digital design conference, one of those boring ones where half the time you're checking your phone. And he was giving a presentation about user interfaces, and honestly, he seemed like the smartest, most calm guy I'd met in a long time. We went for coffee afterwards and talked for hours. And when I say hours, I mean they closed the place. And we had to leave. He's a software engineer, he's 30, and he's one of those people who make you feel truly heard when you talk. He also has mild asthma, something he's managed since he was a kid with an inhaler he always carries with him. It's never been a big deal for him, just part of his normal life. We started dating and everything was perfect for months before I took him to meet my family. I should have warned him more, honestly, but I thought they'd be different with Thomas because he's so obviously a good person that nobody could have a problem with him. How wrong I was. The first time he came to my parents' house for a family dinner, my dad, my uncle, and my cousin sat him down in the living room and literally played 4 consecutive chess games with him. 4. Thomas is good at chess and won 2 out of 4, and I thought that was good, that he'd passed the test. But then I heard my dad tell my uncle that Thomas was too quiet, that he didn't talk enough during the games. I mean, what's he supposed to do? Narrate his chess moves out loud? Things got weird after that, but I kept thinking it was just my family being, well, my family. A month later, we went to a gathering at my uncle's house, and when we came out to the parking lot, Thomas's back tire was completely flat. Not naturally punctured, but clearly cut with something sharp. Thomas just stood there staring at it, and I already knew. I knew in my gut who'd done it. My cousin appeared out of nowhere with that smile he always has when he does something he thinks is funny, and said something like, "Let's see how well you handle this, buddy." Thomas didn't say anything, just took out his phone to call a tow truck, and my cousin mocked him for not changing the tire himself right there. The thing is, Thomas does know how to change a tire, he told me later, but the spare was also flat because my cousin had messed with it too. It was a trap from the beginning. I exploded right there, yelled at my cousin. What the hell was wrong with him? That this wasn't funny or a test, it was vandalism. He just laughed and said if Thomas couldn't handle a flat tire, how was he going to handle real problems? My dad showed up, and instead of defending me or apologizing, he said it was part of seeing what Thomas was made of, that all the men in the family had gone through similar things. I told him that was insane, that nobody has the right to damage someone else's property as some kind of test, but my dad just patted me on the shoulder and said I was being too sensitive. What really started to bother me, and when I say bother, I mean it made my blood boil, was how they treated Thomas's asthma. Every time he used his inhaler, and he uses it casually, no drama, just takes it out, takes 2 puffs and goes on with his life, my dad and uncle would make comments. Things like, "Do you need a break?" Or, "I hope you can handle this," with that condescending smile. Thomas never responded, just ignored the comments, but I could see how he'd clench his jaw. Once my brother said something about how real men don't need help breathing, and Thomas got up from the table, went out to the yard, and I found him there, taking deep breaths. Not because of the asthma, but because he was trying not to explode. He told me he could handle it, that he understood my family was important to me, but I could already see that look in his eyes, that look of exhaustion. Fast forward like 6 months. We were engaged by then. He proposed to me on a beach at sunset, super cliché but perfect, and my family organized a fishing and hunting trip to bond with Thomas. I didn't go because I had an important work deadline, and now I regret so much, not canceling everything and going. Thomas told me afterwards that it was horrible from the start. They put him through hypothetical situations the whole time. Things like, if your wife and your mother are in danger and you can only save one, who do you save? Or, if you lose your job, would you expect your wife to support you? Questions designed so there was no right answer. And when he tried to answer honestly, like saying in the first situation he'd try to save both or get help, they'd accuse him of dodging the question. It was exhausting for him. He told me he didn't sleep well any of the 3 nights. But the worst thing, what absolutely crossed every imaginable line, was the next trip they organized. A month later, they told me they wanted to do a camping trip, just guys, to officially welcome Thomas into the family. I should have said no. I should have put a stop to it right there. But my mom convinced me, saying it would be good, that after this my dad would finally fully accept Thomas. What a huge lie. Thomas went because I asked him to. Because I told him it would mean a lot to me. And he agreed. Even though he was already fed up, I could see it in his face. They left on a Friday afternoon for some place in the mountains, like 3 hours from the city. The plan was to camp 2 nights and come back Sunday. Thomas texted me when he had signal, telling me everything was fine, that they were fishing, making campfires, the normal camping things. Saturday night, he stopped responding, but I didn't worry too much because the signal there was terrible. Sunday, around 2 in the afternoon, I heard Thomas's car in the driveway and I ran out because I wasn't expecting him back until evening. When I opened the door, I saw him, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. He was dirty, with scratches on his arms, and had this expression on his face I'd never seen before, like shock mixed with anger. He came into the house, sat on the couch, and told me everything. Turns out my dad, uncle, and cousin had decided to do a final test. Saturday night, while Thomas was sleeping in his tent, they packed up all their stuff, including his backpack that had his inhaler, and left. They literally abandoned him alone in the woods. They left a note telling him to find his way back like a real man, that it was a survival challenge. Thomas woke up Sunday morning and was completely alone, all the tents taken down, all the cars gone, and his inhaler disappeared with his backpack. He told me at first he thought it was a bad joke, that they'd come back in an hour. But 2 hours passed and then 3, and he realized they were serious. He started walking, trying to find his way back to the road, but the anxiety of being lost and without his inhaler started triggering symptoms. It wasn't a full asthma attack, but his chest did feel tight, and he was having trouble breathing normally. He told me at one point he sat on a rock and genuinely thought, what if something happens to me here and nobody knows where I am? Eventually, he found a trail after walking for like 5 hours, got to a small road, stopped a car, and asked a kind couple to give him a ride to the nearest town. From there, he took a $200 Uber back home. When he finished telling me, he looked at me and said, I'm done with your family. I'm not going to see them again. They're not going to be at our wedding. And if you want to continue with this with me, you need to understand that I'm never again going to subject myself to their garbage. I was crying by that point. I couldn't believe my own family had done something so dangerous, so cruel. I told him he was absolutely right, that I was going to fix this. But he just shook his head and said there was nothing to fix. That people like that don't change. That same afternoon, I drove to my parents' house, went in without knocking, and found my dad watching TV like nothing had happened. I yelled at him, literally yelled. What the hell did he think he was doing? That they'd put Thomas in danger, that they'd crossed every boundary. My dad got up from the couch and told me to calm down, that Thomas was fine, that it had all been in good fun. In good fun. I told him that hiding someone's medication and abandoning them in the woods wasn't in good fun, it was potentially deadly. He responded that if Thomas was so weak he couldn't survive 1 night in the woods, then he wasn't the right man for me. That's when something broke in me. I told him he had no right to decide who the right man for me was, that his stupid tradition was abuse disguised as masculinity, and that if he couldn't respect Thomas and genuinely apologize, then they weren't going to be in my life either. My mom appeared from the kitchen trying to calm things down, saying we all needed to breathe and talk calmly, but I didn't want calm anymore. I told my dad he had 1 week to properly apologize to Thomas or I was cutting contact. He laughed, told me I was being dramatic, that I'd come back when I got over my tantrum. I left there shaking with rage. 2 days later, my brother showed up at my house, unannounced. He came in and started with how I was overreacting, that the family just wanted to make sure Thomas was strong enough, that we'd always done. In these tests, I told him I didn't care what we'd always done, that it was wrong and I was done. My brother accused me of choosing a stranger over my own blood, of breaking up the family over some guy I'd known for only 3 years. I told him Thomas wasn't a stranger. He was my future husband, and that if the family couldn't treat him with basic respect, then yes, I'd choose him over a family that thought abuse was tradition. My brother left slamming the door. The week passed, and there was no apology. I called my mom and told her I was serious, that if Dad didn't apologize, they weren't going to be invited to the wedding and I'd limit contact. My mom cried, begged me to reconsider, that Dad was proud but family was important. I told her I'd been important too. And Thomas was important, and if Dad was so proud he couldn't admit he'd screwed up, that was his problem, not mine. Eventually, my mom managed to convince my dad to come to dinner at our house, Thomas's and mine. It was the most uncomfortable dinner of my life. My dad, uncle, cousin, brother, and mom sat at our table, and there were like 20 minutes of horrible silence before anyone spoke. Thomas was beside me, quiet but present, and I could feel the tension in his body. Finally, my dad cleared his throat and said something like, "Look, if you were offended by the camping thing, that wasn't our intention. If you were offended, not, I'm sorry for putting you in danger, not, I was wrong, just, if you were offended." Thomas responded very calmly, saying he hadn't been offended, that he'd been put in genuine danger, and that hiding someone's medication wasn't a joke or a test, it was abuse. My dad stiffened and said Thomas was being too sensitive, that real men don't complain so much. I interrupted there and told them this was going to be their last chance, that either they respected Thomas and truly apologized, or they left and didn't come back. My uncle muttered something about me acting crazy, and my cousin said it had all been a joke. I told them to leave. My mom stayed, crying, saying, "Please don't do this." That family was everything. I told her that family that hurts you on purpose isn't family, it's abuse, and I wasn't going to tolerate that anymore. Eventually, she left too. 2 weeks of absolute silence passed until my cousin contacted me by text asking to meet for coffee. I agreed, thinking maybe he was going to apologize. We met at a coffee shop near my work, and instead of apologizing, he gave me a whole speech about how I was destroying the family, how my grandparents, who already passed away, would be disappointed in me, how family traditions were important, and I was throwing them in the trash for some guy. I told him traditions that hurt people aren't worth keeping, that he'd participated in something that could have resulted in Thomas ending up in the hospital or worse, and that I wasn't going to feel guilty for setting basic boundaries of decency. He left angry, saying someday I'd regret it. Another awkward dinner happened like a month later. This time my dad agreed to apologize, supposedly. They all came again, and this time there was an attempt to be cordial. My dad looked at Thomas and said, "I'm sorry if things got out of control." If, again with the if, Thomas asked directly, "Do you regret hiding my inhaler and abandoning me in the woods?" And there was a really long silence before my dad said, "I regret that you took it that way." I wanted to scream. Thomas just nodded and said, "Then there's nothing more to discuss." My dad promised they'd be more respectful going forward, that they'd gotten the message. But I didn't believe him at all anymore. I invited them to the wedding anyway, mostly for my mom, who hadn't really done anything wrong. We planned a small wedding, like 60 people, at a nice venue on the outskirts of the city. The week before the wedding, my mom called and told me my dad and brother weren't going to go, that they felt conflicted about supporting a marriage where they felt they hadn't been respected. Can you believe it? They didn't feel respected. I'd given them so many chances to fix things, to simply be decent people, and still they were punishing me. I told my mom I understood, that it was their decision, but that it hurt anyway. She said she would attend, along with my uncle and some cousins who did want to be there. The wedding was beautiful despite everything. Thomas looked incredible in his dark gray suit. I wore a dress I'd dreamed about since I was a girl, and we had our real friends there supporting us. My mom cried during the ceremony. My uncle looked uncomfortable but was present, and some distant relatives I'd always gotten along well with came and were super loving. But there were 2 empty chairs in the family section, my dad's and brother's, and every time I looked at them, I felt this mix of sadness and rage. After the wedding, during our honeymoon in Greece, which was amazing by the way, exactly what we needed, the messages started. My cousin wrote that my dad was devastated to have missed my wedding, that he felt like the victim in all this. The victim. The man who organized abandoning my husband in the woods without his medication felt like the victim. My brother sent a long message about how I'd chosen my happiness over family unity, as if those 2 things were mutually exclusive. I didn't respond to any of those messages. When we got back from the honeymoon, my mom wanted to organize a welcome dinner, But my dad said he wouldn't attend any event where Thomas was present. I told my mom that, then the events would be without my dad, because Thomas was my husband and came with me to everything. She tried to negotiate, to find some middle ground, but there was no possible middle ground. Either my dad accepted he'd been wrong and treated Thomas with respect, or we wouldn't see him. It's been like 6 months since the wedding. My mom comes to visit us sometimes, always alone, and it's weird, because before it was unthinkable to see her without my dad. She tells me he still insists he didn't do anything wrong, that I was the one who overreacted to everything, that Thomas is too sensitive and someday I'll realize it. My brother has stopped talking to me completely, blocked me on all social media. My cousin tries to send me memes sometimes as if nothing happened, trying to get back to normal without ever addressing what he did, and I just leave his messages on read. Thomas and I established clear boundaries. We're not going to events where my dad or brother are until there's a real apology, without buts or ifs, and until they demonstrate with actions that they understand why it was wrong. We're not going to pretend nothing happened just to keep family peace. And I'm not going to feel guilty for protecting my husband from people who think hurting him is acceptable. Last week, my mom told me my dad has been going to therapy, that his therapist has been helping him see things differently. I don't know if it's true or if it's another attempt by my mom to fix things, but I told her I was glad to hear that when my dad was ready to truly talk, to acknowledge the harm he did without excuses, I'd be willing to listen. But until then, my life with Thomas is peaceful, it's loving, and I don't need the toxic drama of a family that values stupid traditions more than people's safety. Does it hurt? Yes, every day. Do I regret it? Not for a second. Because at the end of the day, I chose someone who loves me, respects me, and would never put me in danger to prove a point. And that's more than my own family could offer me.